Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. That's a pretty good mic. All right. Thank you, Scout, for that brief introduction. I left some flyers on the back table, so if you know somebody on the autism spectrum, a loved one, a friend, a family member, feel free to pick up a flyer. They're just right back there next to the Easter Bunny basket. So my name is Kristin Ojala. I'm a Senior Clinical Director with JUVO Autism and Behavioral Health Services. And we're an agency here in Oakland. I actually have a couple of slides on JUVO in a moment, so I think we'll start by just jumping in, and then we'll talk a little more about JUVO in a moment. Okay, so some of you guys heard me talk, I think, back in November, and I heard your feedback, and I changed the slides a little bit. So, because as I've learned more about the work that you guys are doing and understanding the environment that you work in, I've tried to modify the suggestions that I have because it's different from other environments. So first, I want to start by just doing an exercise around a recent challenging behavior. So can anybody who doesn't have to be an OR example, just here in the hospital, can somebody share something that happened recently with an individual? Doesn't even have to be an individual with special needs, but a child that had a challenging behavior, and tell me that scenario, what happened while maintaining HIPAA. Okay, go ahead.
I missed the last presentation, unfortunately, because I was just upstairs with a 20-year-old who had developmental delay and who came to Periop and was refusing to take off, to put on the pajamas. I think it was getting real, and she figured that once I put the pajamas on, it's going to get realer, and I didn't start with the, yeah, put on the pajamas. I just got to know her a little bit. And sometimes something that will work for that, which may come up later, is, you know, hey, rather than you have to put the pajamas on, it's, you know, once you put the pajamas on, what would you like to do? What can you do once those are on? And I sort of make it a implied contingency. And for some reason, her thing was 1967 Mustangs. She liked that was her jam, and so she was showing me pictures of them on her phone. And I said, "How much do you want to bet that there's a 1967 Mustang coloring page on the internet?" And she thought about it, and she's like, "I bet there is." And I said, "I bet so too, and I'm going to go look. And while I do that, go ahead and put your PJs on. I'll come back with it, and then we're both going to color it and see which is better." And I came back and the PJs were on. So just contingency. I'm Hania, by the way. I'm the child life specialist upstairs.
Love it. Yeah. Is this on? Is that working?
No, but we can hear you.
I'm just going to yell. I'm a pretty loud person. Great. So there was a demand placed, right? The person needed to put their pajamas on, or they needed to change to get ready for a procedure. And you already stole all my strategies, so I don't like this. No, I'm kidding. This is a great example, actually, of something that you used these strategies that we're going to talk about to prevent a challenging behavior from occurring in the first place. So I love that example for how you worked through it. That's a perfect example of what to do in those types of moments. Has anybody experienced a behavior recently that didn't go so well, or maybe a child got a little more escalated and you guys had to call for reinforcements?
I think post-op, because you just never know how they're going to react. So, and he was a big kid, and he was autistic, and Ben was his nurse, luckily, and he was trying to karate chop all of us. So I think it was a ratio of 4 to 1, and he was still winning. But and it was hard because his mom said once he gets out of this, he'll be fine. But it was just so sad because she's trying to comfort him, but yet the effects of the anesthesia is on board. So the anesthesiologist had to come by, give him some more, you know, happy baby medicines. But just to experience that and having the mom go through that, but she knew he was going to go through it, but to see him possibly hurt himself, hurt us, hurt someone, so there's a lot of different aspects of it.
Yeah.
So that was hard. I mean, he did get out of it, but it took some time and wrestling.
Had you guys asked him to do something, or did he just come up out of anesthesia and was already disoriented?
And part of it was the delirium, or just because he couldn't express himself. I'm not sure. It's
Was he
combination of different things.
non-vocal? Could he speak?
He's nonverbal.
Yeah, so he didn't have the ability to express himself easily. Okay. So, yeah, that's always a tough scenario. I was reminded of that last time I talked because usually my kids aren't coming out of anesthesia, right, when I'm working with them, and I'd forgotten about the side effects of that, and that just waking up can be, different people respond differently, but typically developing people can wake up and really have a reaction to it. Any other things that have happened? Doesn't even have to be recently, but just one last scenario anybody wants to share?
We had a patient who, fairly, big teenage boy, autistic, some words, not many. He was supposed to come to the OR, and he was one of those ones they couldn't get him into Periop, couldn't get him changed, so having him changed, then tried to walk with him into the operating room. He sat down on the floor, and they worked for an hour trying to get him up and into the OR. That wasn't happening, so they actually canceled the case. He went home, and he came back again. I think they got it on the third time. I don't know what strategies eventually worked, but
This may have been one of my guys.
it
Because this is sounding familiar. We had a family who lives in Richmond that he needed to come in for procedures 15 anyway. I know we can't disclose names and all of that, but yeah, I think it took 3 or 4 tries because he the first time he wouldn't even enter the hospital. He was like, nope, I'm going in the car. So yeah, all sorts of things that you guys see, right, in different scenarios with challenging behaviors. So we'll come back to that a little bit more. I'm going to talk a little bit about what autism is. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what ABA is. What is JUVO? Us. 3 things to ask all parents. I think I came up with 3 things that, like, if you could go in knowing just 3 things, these would be the 3 things that I would ask a family. And then strategies to talk about preventing challenging behaviors from occurring, and then de-escalation strategies for using when somebody's already agitated. Okay, what is autism? So this is actually something surprisingly, even in the medical community, I see a lot of misunderstanding about what autism is and how it's diagnosed. So I got the whole definition for you guys out of the DSM here. I'm not going to read it to you. It's easily, you can find it on Google. But autism is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts as manifested by the following, currently or by history. So the big one is deficits in social emotional reciprocity, ranging, for example, abnormal social approaches. So this can be things like just impaired social skills, right? That could be anything from limited eye contact, poor conversation skills. It's a whole range, right? That's why it's called autism spectrum disorder, is because it is a spectrum. You get folks that are very impacted by their diagnosis and have very limited skills, and then you get some of our guys that are really quite high skill, and you wouldn't necessarily recognize that they're on the autism spectrum. So deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors. So eye contact is another example here. Deficits in developing, maintaining, understanding relationships. So understanding social behavior and peers, that's obviously a big one that we see and we work a lot with, is getting kids to be able to interact with their peers in more socially appropriate ways. The other area is restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior. So this is sometimes called stereotypy or stimming. Not all people on the spectrum do this, but it comes out in different forms. It can look very similar to obsessive or compulsive behavior. And so sometimes I've worked with kids that didn't get an autism diagnosis until much later in life because they really demonstrated what we would think of as like OCD type behaviors. But they also, when you went back and looked at their developmental history, they had deficits in other social skills, they had impaired language in early childhood, things like that. Okay, so it can be an insistence on sameness and inflexible adherence to routines or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Sometimes some people engage in vocal, what some people might think of as tics, but they're like repetitive vocalizations. And some of our kids just have really restricted, fixated interests, so maybe their thing is Thomas the Train. And that's all they want to talk about, that's all they think about, it's all about Thomas. They have zero interest in talking or thinking about anything else. And then hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input and unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. This is another area, again, it doesn't necessarily, not all individuals have this, but it's commonly associated with folks on the spectrum. So this can be visual fascination with lights, movement. You'll see kids hold things at different angles, look at them. Kids that are engaging in those types of behaviors, if you have an idea of what they're looking at or what sensory input they're going for there, that can actually be a really helpful way to figure out what they like. Because it could be, I've worked with a lot of kids that just like looking at things from different angles. So you fill a water bottle with glitter and you shake it, and that's a very easy, right, cheap tool that you can carry around. Then they just hang out and look at it, and that's something they can work for, right? So a couple of other things. The symptoms have to be present in early developmental period, but they may not manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities or maybe masked by learned strategies later in life. So you do get adults that are diagnosed in adulthood, but it's usually done retroactively through interviews and things like that and looking at what was present when the person was young. Symptoms must cause a clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, other important areas of current functioning, and the disturbances are not better explained by intellectual disability, global developmental delay, which are other things that comorbidly you do see sometimes with folks on the spectrum. Okay, so how's it diagnosed? There is no medical test. It's consult with an autism specialist. So the gold standard in diagnostic evaluation would be these 6 things. Usually it's psychologists, psychiatrists, developmental pediatricians, those types of folks. Sometimes neurologists do the diagnosing work. But they should have some familiarity in diagnosis and be able to diagnose out of the DSM. So parent interview, record review, cognitive development. It's 4 times more common in boys than in girls. There's a 10 to 17% annual increase in recent years. So just snapshots there. What causes it? Like we were talking about, there's no one type of autism, so there's not one cause. There's a lot of research going on about this right now. It's a combination of genetic risk and environmental factors that influence brain development. We do know that there's a very high genetic correlation with autism in identical twin studies, right? Kind of the gold standard for a lot of these things. If one twin has autism, there's a 90% chance the other twin will have it. So far, the research has identified more than 100 genes that put a person at risk, so it's not just one gene or one chromosome, the way Down syndrome is, one chromosome related. And there's environmental risk factors. Some of the things that have been pretty highly correlated are advanced parental age, very low birth weight, and exposure to high levels of pesticides and air pollution. So incidentally, I should have looked up facts on this, so don't quote me on this. I have read that San Jose has one of the highest autism diagnosis rates in the country, and there's some thought that it's related to the levels of pollution that we have in the Bay Area, both air, water, all that kind of stuff. Okay, what does not cause autism? I have to keep this in here. So that was the, well, this was literally the theory in the 1960s. As psychiatrists would, these parents would come in looking for answers and would go, oh, well, because you don't love your child. That's why they're not talking. And that was the answer that was given to parents. Temple Grandin, she's a professor at Colorado State. She is on the autism spectrum. She tells stories about this, that her mother was looking for answers. I think she was raised in the 50s and 60s, and similar type of situation where her mom was basically blamed for what was going on. So not bad parenting, not vaccinations. Yeah, I won't get into the whole, you guys are medical professionals, I won't get into that whole debate. But something that I do like to share when people bring this up, because they say, oh, well, there was a article published in the Lancet that showed that vaccines cause autism, and that doctor was also stripped of his medical license because he fabricated all of the data for that article. So anyway, Juvo, who we are a leading provider of behavioral health services for individuals with autism and other special needs, their families, and the surrounding community. The majority of our clients are on the autism spectrum, but we also work with kids and adults with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, other neurological disorders, genetic disorders, whole range of folks. And we provide services designed to support children with autism and other special needs. Our services are delivered at home, school, camp, and other community settings, and all of our services are grounded in the principles of applied behavior analysis. So applied behavior analysis is it's considered a branch of psychology. It's based on the original work of B.F. Skinner back in the 30s at Harvard. It's the science of learning, right? People are like, oh, it's dog training. It's what explains the behavior of all living organisms, including humans and dogs. So reinforcement, punishment, those types of things, that's what we do. All right. So talking a little bit about parents, because I've had lots of conversations with Scout and the other nurses, and I know they're working diligently to put together that checklist and some of those pre-op things that will go a long way towards being helpful. But if I could ask parents 3 questions, these would be my 3 things. This is for me as somebody who's worked with hundreds of kids on the spectrum. Going in, I'll be like, what do they like? What do they hate? Are they verbal? What challenging behaviors do they demonstrate? Because that would at least give me a snapshot of where that individual is. So, what do they like? What do they not like? I'm going to use that, right? I'm going to use things that they like to my advantage. The example of the young lady that was into Mustangs is a great one. How do they communicate? Lots of kids are non-vocal, right? And as ABA services become more prevalent, my hope is that we will get to a point where most folks have some ability to communicate in some modality, whether it's sign language, PECs, augmented communication devices. You know, it doesn't have to be vocal language, but just some way of expressing themselves. This is a big area that our field focuses on, and it's sort of one of my big things is like, I don't care what skills they have, that's bottom line, they have to be able to ask for the things that they want in some way, shape, or form. And you do see a lot of kids that don't get services, or the school wasn't able to teach this successfully, and so they hit 18, 19, 20 adulthood, and they don't have a way of going up and saying, hey, I'd really like some crackers, you know, whatever it is that they want at that moment. But knowing if they can communicate vocally or not. And then what challenging behaviors do they demonstrate, right? It's nice to know if somebody's going to slug you. And you never know. Sometimes you get surprised. I was working with a little guy last week, and I broke my own rule and was standing behind him and bent over to talk to him. He slapped me right in the face. He was very mad at me. You know, you just... Sometimes that happens, but ideally if you can ask and the family has seen the behavior, they will share it with you. Some families, particularly families from certain cultural backgrounds, are not as likely to share this information. So you have to just take what you can get. A lot of families, there's a deep level of embarrassment or shame associated with challenging behaviors. And so they may be less likely to, you know, the person might be highly aggressive, but they won't tell you because they're just hoping that that behavior won't appear. So that's parents. Again, I was trying to think quick. I know you guys have limited time. You know, sometimes Scout was explaining to me, you guys are getting these referrals like the night before or the morning of. And it's like, hey, here's a kid, you're doing this procedure. So there's not a lot of time to prepare, but just knowing these things I think would be at least helpful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about antecedent strategies. In layman's terms, antecedent strategies are things that we can do to prevent challenging behaviors from occurring. the thing that's really important to note, it is not appropriate to use these strategies once the challenging behavior has already started. I always use the train analogy with my team, and once the behavior train is there, you're on that train and we're not getting off until the behavior has been de-escalated. It's the best type of strategy you have when working with limited time, limited rapport, and limited knowledge of the child's abilities. So it's not a cure-all, it's not a guarantee, but a lot of these things are really, really helpful. They'll seem simple, but very helpful. Okay, so a couple ones that I'm going to focus on is building rapport, rewarding the good behavior with attention, priming, or the Periop principle, so basically just telling the person what's going on, what's coming up next. Setting expectations with schedules, and clear communication. We'll go into those in a little bit more detail. Okay. So as professionals, I think one of the first things we should all do with our clients is build rapport, right? Bedside manner, that's a thing in the medical community. We have to have rapport as well, just like speech pathologists, OTs. I mean, if you work with humans, you need to be able to develop rapport with humans. So what is rapport, right? How would you guys define rapport? Does somebody want to share what their definition of rapport is?
How you get along with somebody, or how you reach them on some level.
Building trust.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important piece. Anybody else?
Just getting to know them.
Yeah.
Making that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be, there's many levels of rapport, right? The rapport that you have after working with somebody for an hour is completely different than the rapport you have with your husband or your wife. But rapport does exist on different levels, and you can build it pretty quickly with kids, usually. So how do we develop it? Being positive and upbeat is a really, really important thing with kids. I think even teenagers, even though they want to be grumpy, and they might, have their own thoughts and feelings and opinions about things, that's fine. I think still being positive and upbeat is important, and 90% of folks or higher will respond favorably to being positive and upbeat. Providing things or activities the person likes, and engaging in activities with the person that they enjoy. So again, that comes back to that question that hopefully we've been able to talk to the caregiver. We've had a caregiver that either speaks a language you speak, or we have a translator present so we can communicate with the caregiver. And we have, even if it's really basic things of what the person likes, maybe they like looking at lights. That's something the caregiver has noticed. Okay, we can use that to our advantage. Not all the time, but again, I would say with at least 80 to 90% of folks that I've worked with, your attention is probably reinforcing. People like attention. Even that's one of the biggest things that I think people misunderstand about folks on the spectrum, is they assume because they lack the social skills that they don't want to interact with other humans. And that's 100% false. They're just as social as anybody else. They want to interact with other other people, and develop relationships, but sometimes they just don't know how to develop those relationships. So you might be 4 and running around, and instead of saying, hey, play with me, you come up and smack your friend, because that's a great way to get attention from that person, right? Try it. It works if you want to get somebody's attention. So we want to keep that in mind, because like I said, I think that that's a little bit of a stereotype that exists out there, is just because they have a diagnosis of autism, they don't want to, they're antisocial and hate other humans and don't want to talk to them. That's not true. They're kids, they're social, they're adults too. I know adults on the spectrum who really are looking for social networking opportunities. So praise the behavior you want to see, and don't comment on the behaviors you don't want to see. It seems a little bit silly. It's like one of those old, child raising things that floats around in American culture, but it's really true. Praise, like even if I walked into a pre-op room and I saw the kid and they're sitting there with their mom and they're looking at a book together, I'd be like, wow, look at you, look how ready you are. You're sitting down, you're listening to mom, you're reading a book together. I love how ready you look right now. Again, it sounds a little silly, but that kid is doing exactly what they need to be doing. They're not up hanging from the ceiling, running around, smacking people, right? So we want to recognize whenever they are doing something appropriate. And, you know, if you walk into the room and they're hanging from the ceiling and smacking mom, not going to comment on it. Not going to, you know, say anything. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we're going to just try and direct them to what they need to be doing. So sit down and I'll show you a fun ball. You know, or I brought a little goodie bag of toys again. You guys are welcome to these. But, you know, whatever things that you think the child might like, be like, oh, you know, come sit down and let's play with the transformer together. Right? So you're not saying stop hanging from the ceiling and hitting your mother. It's sit down and I'll give you the transformer man. So again, you can tell I like this concept. I have another slide on it. Just be positive and reward what you want to see. Even, and I think this is especially important with a child that you can sense that they're apprehensive, you know? So the great example with the young lady who didn't want to put the pajamas on, that's when I'm thinking, okay, I can see the behavior train. And my actions in this moment are now going to dictate whether or not that child has a huge challenging behavior, or whether or not we just kind of ignore that and go over here and say, wow, you like Mustangs. Let's look at some Mustang pictures together once you put your pajamas on. So a lot of it is actually based on our behavior. Again, I think conceptually people think, oh, that person is having a behavior. They need to calm down. They need to regulate. They need to do whatever they need to do. The opposite. The environment is what causes and continues behaviors. So you have to change the environment, and we're part of the environment. Praise, high fives, tangible items they like, verbal attention, anything the kid likes that the parent reported. A lot of kids really like physical praise and attention, even if they're a little bit older. Developmentally, you know, a child might be 8, 9, 10 years old, but developmentally they might be 2 or 3, right? Or demonstrating skills on par with a typically developing 2 or 3-year-old. So in the moment, if that's what you have, and that kid really likes to, you know, have some hand squeezes or, you know, jump up and down with them or whatever, if they are reinforced by that, run with it. Even if it doesn't feel age appropriate, it doesn't matter, right, in that moment. If they really like Dora and they're 16, you know, just, they like Dora and just use it to your advantage. I thought this might happen. Let's see. We have time. We're going to go on a little internet adventure here. More flat in their affect, or they don't demonstrate those same behaviors, you might just see more subtle versions of it. So eye contact is actually a big one, where if the person is really interested in the activity or you, or they find you interesting, they will look at you. I found that to be true 100% of the time. Go ahead.
Eye contact always threw me a little bit, because if the child didn't want eye contact, then I didn't know if my eye contact to them was threatening. So is that... I never knew what to do.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I still looked at them because I didn't know how to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be able to look at kids. Yeah. You know, I'm very pragmatic in what I do, and you can't be like, okay, I'm now going to insert the IV, and you know, like you can't. So I think we have to be able to look at people. Let's put it this way, I've never worked with a kid that had a problem with eye contact unless they were being forced to make eye contact. Like literally taking their head, or some of the more invasive like prompts and things, which we don't use, where it's like, look at me, and then you're literally like, oh.
I just heard Temple Grandin talking about that, and he said the worst thing you can do is say, look at me, make eye contact. We want to make eye contact. It's just so uncomfortable for us. So she said, just don't bring it up and make the eye contact and leave them be. It was interesting.
Yep.
Dee, I think also having, at least initially, having, like you were saying earlier, some sort of activity going on or some sort of shared focus where both of your eyes are on the same thing, that can be a step to them eye contact with them, because immediately they may not want to look right at you, but if there's a difference between both looking at something you're doing and you sort of looking off, not making eye contact.
That's a great point, yeah. It's that, and actually I'm going to show you, this is the other video I wanted to show you guys right here, really simplifying the language. We have a tendency to get very verbose with kids for unknown reasons. And especially with some of our kids that we don't really know how much language they understand, right? Maybe some of our non-vocal folks, we're not sure of what they might be understanding or what they're not. So instead of saying, hey, you know, I need you to come sit in this chair, and oh, look at how nice the chair is, and I'm going to be over here doing this, and well, you know, sit down. Like, it's also kids are, particularly kids on the spectrum, there's this concept in the research that they either under-focus or over-focus on irrelevant stimuli in the environment, and what that means is that they may not pay attention to the full chain of language, right, the full sentence. They might hear the first word or random words here and there, but the point being is if you just say, sit down, that's it, right? You know, they're probably much more likely to hear you versus using more complicated language. We'll watch a little bit of these and all of that gets into the skill acquisition part of what we do. This is a great video though. I love this grandma. I'd work with this grandma anytime. But I just thought it was a good point that she makes that, you know, I did this when I first started in the field. I had very limited exposure to working with kids previous to starting an ABA. I was not what I would call a kid person. When I was younger, I didn't particularly like children. I found them noisy and strange, and I didn't know what they wanted, and, you know, preferred to either spend time with adults or animals. And working in this field has really taught me that we overthink it, right? It is pretty basic stuff that sometimes, like he was cool with that ball machine, you know what I mean? Like if that was like a preoperative setting, right? And you had that little ball machine, you've got that guy. He's, you know, you can just sit there and pop balls in, and then you can be like, okay, we're gonna change now, woo! And he'd probably be like, yeah, you know? You just keep the affect up, you know, we're gonna talk more about the pre-MAC principle here, but the example earlier of, you know, finding something the person likes. So if we're gonna have to place a demand, which you guys are going to do, right? That's your job. So you're gonna have to tell the person to do something. That's a huge part of my job as well. But we want to, hopefully, have something that we know the person likes. And then we're gonna say, first I'm gonna look in your ear, then you can get a treasure from the treasure box. You know, first lie down, then I'll show you a video clip. You know, change your pajamas, and then we'll look at pictures of 67 Ford Mustangs. It's very specific. I love how specific that is. Just 67s? Okay. It's a good year. So the whole idea is you place the demand, and then you let the person know hard thing first, then fun thing. And we talked about food in November. I know you guys can't use food because a lot of times if they're about to go into the OR, they can't eat, right? They've been fasting and they can't have any liquids, so, because food's a great one. But toys, right? Affect, physical, you know, tickles, things like that. You can use all of those. And again, keep the language very simple and directive-based. So a couple more examples. The statement informing, right, the child that a preferred task or item will be provided after completion of a lesser preferred or more challenging task. Keep your request simple, reasonable, and one that the child can do as much as possible. Use clear and specific language. When you show me you're ready, we'll go, instead of, when you show me you're ready, we'll go outside, say first arm cuff, then hand squeezes. Instead of, when you are good, you may have your toy. This is a huge one, right? Sit down on table, then toy. So it's okay to shorten language even to that point, again, especially if you really think this is a kid with limited language skills. It could be sit down, then toy. You know, or first sit, gestures, right, or palms. So first sit, then so setting expectations, priming, goes into pre-macking. There's slightly different variations of the same concept. So how do we convey expectations to children? We can tell them, we can write them down, we can put them in picture form. And I had a great conversation with Scout around visual schedules. Do all children need visual schedules? This is another thing that you'll see very commonly in special education classrooms, or really just preschools, right? They use a lot of visual schedules. Now, visual schedules are great. They're certainly not going to hurt anyone if you use one. It is based entirely on the child's vocal language skills and cognitive skills. If you can, real pictures are better than cartoons. So having pictures of, this would be something, I know materials you guys would have to have developed ahead of time, but pictures of the different places in the OR or the different things that are going to happen in the process and putting them on a schedule. And then you always pair the picture with the language regardless of the child's functioning level if there is pictures on the schedule, and I'm going to show you guys some examples. So the one on the left is kind of your standard, there's a computer software program that makes these cartoon images that are forever in everybody's head in ABA. And that's fine, you know, if that's what you got, great, use it. This is a daily schedule for a child going to school. This is a first then board. Sometimes those can be helpful for kids, again, kids with more impacted cognitive abilities, where a kid with higher skills, I might say, first sit down, then toys, and that's entirely sufficient because I have the toy in front of them. This can be just an additional tool, and these are real small, easy. You can kind of keep it in your pocket, bust it out if you need it, have some different pictures. It's low tech, it's Velcro. We're just putting things on boards with Velcro. Or good old-fashioned handwriting, right? For some of our older kids or kids that can read and write. By the way, don't ever assume a child can't read and write just because they're non-vocal. I've worked with a ton of kids that can read and write very well and were completely non-vocal. So they communicated on iPad-based systems, and we did a lot of teaching around using that system to talk. So we worked with one girl who, she graduated from our program, she's doing awesome. She can speak in full sentences, but she's diagnosed both being on the spectrum and with moderate intellectual disability. And she'll just sit there and like type out the whole thing, and then like show it to you, and then the iPad reads the sentence to you. So it's cool. The technology that we have now is cool. But just a basic written schedule can, if you don't have anything else and you have a piece of paper and a pen, you can just say, first, we're going to change our clothes, then we're going to wash your hands, then it's going to be time to lay down in the bed and go to sleep, or whatever, whatever the process is going to look like. You can tell I've had surgery a lot. I might have no idea what happens. Another example of a written schedule, a whiteboard, right? You have a little whiteboard around and a dry erase marker. You can just write it out. It's better than nothing. I've even drawn little stick man pictures. Some kids like drawing, so then the writing of the schedule is the reinforcing activity, right? Because you've got two things going on there. You could have them do something, and then not only are they getting your attention for having done that thing, but if they like drawing or writing, you could draw or write the schedule together. I'll say, ooh, here's me, I'm changing my pajamas. Okay, here, you want to draw yourself doing whatever's next on the schedule. That might be fun for some kids that like that. Okay, so moving a little bit to adult communication styles. Maintaining a calm affect, right? Positive, but calm when interacting with a client. Do not, under any circumstances, comment on challenging behavior when it occurs. Be in the moment, leave personal matters at the door. I always encourage people when I'm first training them in the field, spend some time thinking about your own bias when it comes to working with individuals and what things are going to be triggers for you and what things aren't. We all have them. Everybody has bias. It's part of being human. But I think being aware of what yours are going into it helps a lot so that you don't inadvertently irritate somebody by saying something in their presence. And just don't discuss the child in front of them. They have ears, they can hear you. Again, even kids who are non-vocal, you're not sure where their language skills are at, assume they can understand you, because they probably can. And I see a lot of, even in my field, I still see a lot of people, well, they'll come in and they'll sit down with mom and dad, and mom will be like, you know what, he had the crappiest day today. He hit the teacher, he smacked the cat, he ran around and took all his clothes off, or whatever, and all of these things, and they're right there. But the kid is right there listening, and oftentimes these will be teenagers too, where again, they can hear you. And everybody's like, oh, that's so terrible. Okay, so next time he's gonna lose all of his stars, and he's gonna go to bed early and no dinner, and I don't know, whatever, things they're talking about. And I try and intervene, and you guys can do the same if you see it happening with your colleagues and say, hey, why don't we have this conversation with the parent outside the room? I'll stay here with the child and play with the transformer man. Or whatever. And again, I know there's not always multiple staff around to do that, but just be cognizant of that. That is a huge trigger that I've seen in school settings for challenging behaviors. I've spent a lot of my career working in schools, and you'll see a lot of non-special ed folks doing things like that. I've had lunch ladies scream across the cafeteria at students, like, don't touch that, don't do that, things like that, and it triggered a huge behavior. So, people have ears. That's the lesson there. A couple of other quick ones that I think are really nice to use is choice making. So, offer choices with as many activities as you can. Small choices, silly choices. Those of you with children probably have learned this, right? So, do you want the green arm cuff or the red arm cuff? I know you guys don't have green or red arm cuffs, but it's just we do. So my example was good. Do you want me to look in your eyes or your ears first? Should we sit in our exam for 5 minutes or 6 minutes? That's my favorite, is when you have to do something and sit down. It's like, we're going to do homework. Do you want to do it for 10 or 15 minutes? And I'm always amazed at the kids that say 15. And I'm like, you don't have, your time skills may not be. But I can see, like, wow, I love how you're sitting down. I've got some fun things with me today. After we change your clothes, what do you want to do? Do you want to color, play with the Transformer Man, or do the Avengers puzzle? So they're choosing the reinforcer, right? And these are all, maybe they don't like any of those options, but at least they get a choice, right? Choice is a pretty natural motivator for most human beings, and the more control we have over our daily activities, the less likely we are to engage in challenging behaviors to gain that control. That's true of adults too. Okay, so that was the portion on the antecedent techniques. Offer choices, keep your language short and brief, be fun and positive and upbeat. Don't comment on behaviors, challenging behaviors if they occur. And pre-mac as much as you can. First, we're gonna have a scary shot, and then we're gonna do the Avengers puzzle together. So as an agency, we use a curriculum designed by behavior analysts to train our folks how to stay safe and keep children safe. And it goes all the way from basic de-escalation techniques up to 4-person holds. We actually don't teach the beyond 1-person holds anymore because we don't need to use them usually. But when I like this, wish I could give you specific techniques, I can't because they'll yell at me. I'm not a trainer of safety care, so I can't train others, and then we're not licensed to train others as like it's the usual stuff. So I can't actually demonstrate any of those techniques. It's something that people have to get put through a formal training by a trainer. When behaviors occur, it's really important to focus on de-escalating the person as soon as possible, and ethically, right, to avoid the use of restraints or injections unless absolutely necessary. Again, in a medical setting, you guys have this as an option. We don't. So that's why we have so many other tools in our tool bucket, but I still think from an ethical standpoint, if we can avoid restraining someone, we're going to do everything that we can until we get to that point. Okay, so big one. Don't keep calm. It doesn't matter how significant the behavior is, what the person is doing, they have grabbed scissors and they're coming at you. Don't yell, don't scream, even if you're injured or surprised. Try and, just stay calm and quiet and very neutral. Give the individual something that they will like if they will take it. I mean, it can be anything, right? If you happen to have something like this, your toolkit, I would just be like, here you go. I just hand it to them, right? Because it can be an incompatible behavior. If someone's trying to hit you, and then you're like, here, and they take this, can they hit you and hold a puzzle at the same time? They can try. They might start getting the puzzle, but at least you have successfully gotten something in their hands, and hopefully maybe they will like it and it will be a distractor for them. Minimize language and use a very neutral tone to message what you want the person to do. There's a difference between an angry, pissed off tone and a neutral tone, by the way. A lot of my staff took a little while for them to learn that because I get it. You might be flustered or injured or whatever is going on, but sit down, it's been all done. Show me a calm body and then we'll be all done. Avoid touching the person unless you have to. This is, anecdotally, I have not found that touching people or rubbing them or trying to do that type of soothing, like a sensory soothing thing, to be successful. I find that escalates people more often than not. I don't recommend using it. To each their own if you found it successful, but I haven't. Point to what's next on the schedule, right? So you've got your handy little visual schedule that you've made here, and you can say, time to sit down. Then we're going to have our puzzle. Again, don't discuss the behavior. Don't discuss what's occurring with others. This is another big one. Have all unnecessary staff leave the room. I don't know how many folks you guys have in the rooms, but if they don't have to be in the room right at that moment, ask them to leave. And designate someone to stay in the room as the de-escalation person. But if the doctor doesn't need to be in there yet, or the anesthesiologist, I don't know, just say, hey, let's have this person de-escalate in here with maybe 1 or 2 individuals in the room, and then everybody else leaves the room. If appropriate, have a parent enter the room. If they're in an environment where the parent can still enter, it's not a, what do you call the spaces where you have to be all scrubbed before you go? Thank you. If it's not a sterile environment, right, have the parent come in. And hopefully they will act as a calming influence on the child. They don't always, but you can take that risk, right? In the moment, I think it is better to have a parent be there if they know how to de-escalate the person. So again, I wish I had more fancy systems to show you guys when it comes to de-escalation, but the big one is just keep calm, keep it simple, stay neutral, don't touch them, don't yell at them. And I think that's a huge one, is I see a lot of crisis situations, at least in schools. These are folks that see behaviors all the time, and it's all hell is breaking loose, right? Like, people are screaming and yelling, the principal's like calling the police, like everybody's like, and it's, we don't need to do that. We don't need to get that level. If it is an emergency or it's at a point where somebody's so escalated that they need to be sedated, right, we can text or call or walkie-talkie, or I don't know, communicate just, hey, I need some support in here, or something like that, so that somebody comes in to back you up. Okay, thank you. I appreciate you guys being here.